That terrifies the U.S. defense industry.
Test equipment to join the ecosystem.
The starting point could be close to reality or very far away removed.
The work that is being done between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran.
I know Ukrainians that are doing this exact thing.
None of, Europeans can deliver the same kind of reality check as Ukrainians can deliver.
Hi, this is JP Lindsley with our Coalition of the Doing podcast from Under Fire News. And each week, or I try to each week, check in with Deborah Fairlamb, co-founder of Green Flag Ventures VC fund, supporting Ukrainian Miltech and dual use in Kyiv. Deborah's an American based in Kyiv. And we have a special guest with us today, Maksym Eristavi, a Ukrainian journalist and writer. He's author of the award-winning book, Deborah, I can cue you here, the award-winning book, Russian Colonialism 101. It's an illustrated guide to 48 Russian invasions over the last century. And before we dive into this, I'll say today, July 15th, is Saint Volodymir's Day. It's the day when Ukrainians remember their statehood. And Volodymyr the Great was known for, in the year 988 AD, the baptism of the Kievan Rus. And so it's a special day for Ukrainians. And it's a reminder that Ukrainian history is older than the city of Moscow, which was founded a couple centuries later. But as we start here with Deborah and Maksym, Maksym, you're just returning to your home from Berlin, where you were attending the European Defense Tech Hackathon. Can you tell us what that was and what was it? And then we'll get into what lessons can be learned from what you saw last week.
Well, thanks, first of all, for inviting me. I was just listening to your previous conversations. I was like, low-key fangirling over this. So I really love most of all the name of it. So the Coalition of Doing is just very brilliant. I'm a very new baby in all of this defense tech space because, as you mentioned, like my background usually always been in journalism and in writing, in researching, and I would never imagine myself doing that in general. But there's Russia always next to you, so you kind of end up doing things you would never imagine, for good or for bad. But I love going to European Defense Tech Hackathons, which is like this series of events for people caring about defense innovation. And basically, it is as grassroots as you can possibly get in Europe, because in general, there are a lot of talks now about European innovation in defense, a lot of money thrown around. They report about these record numbers of investments being secured and procurement and everything. What always misses for me as a Ukrainian, that I got used to look at the defense innovation that we've seen since 2014 as a grassroots event. Lots of people abroad do not know that the first innovation on Ukrainian battlefield happened thanks to nonprofits, for civil society organizations, for volunteers. They brought the first drones, or they brought the first money to allow, military people who are foremost civil society people oftentimes to do the innovation, to tweak it, to develop, and so on and so on. In Europe, when I first got exposed to this crowd, I haven't seen anything like that until I got to the hackathons of EDTH. And that's where I see the kids who don't have any money, who have the right set of values, who are devoted to Ukrainian victory, who understand why Ukraine must win for us to for us to remain safe. And this is where I'm going, because this is the only place that, for me, outside Ukraine, feels true and no BS, and really, really devoted for defense innovation in its truest sense.
Max, well said. And now I'm in Albania now. Now I'm advertising my secret location, but I'm in the Stone Mountaintop Village for a little bit of a mental retreat after being in the war every day for 4 years. But I was just in France, where I had some very tough conversations with good friends and people involved in the defense industry, and in so many ways, I saw the information gap is still vast, even with people who sort of spiritually or emotionally support Ukraine. And I'm talking with French Miltech experts and people building Miltech businesses there, and they kept saying to me, yeah, what we're building for France is inherently must be different than Ukraine. We're not at war. They had all these different excuses. And the thing that I said that got them to wake up, I said, everything you just said, you would have total credibility in the world at large if you said that before February 28th of this year. But now, post February 28th, to those, whether in Washington or Europe, those people who are paying attention now realize what we've been saying for years, that if you assume you have air superiority, but you haven't considered drones and drone interceptors and electronic warfare, you're not ready at all for warfare as it is today and as it will be in the future. And so that's why the European Defense Tech Hackathon is such a great thing, because it moves around to different cities in Europe, trying to spread to spread that energy from the grassroots. And as you said, and Deborah, we can get your perspectives on this, but the guys with the best ideas and the stuff that works don't have the big investments. And Deborah, that's a huge part of your work, is bringing them the investments they need. But you couldn't have a better setup. They have the ability to prove things in battle. They have the motivation to do it, and they have the freedom to innovate, especially in Ukraine. You don't have to go through red tape in the innovation process. And so what a better place to work, and a better people. You can't find better people to test Miltech, and yet there still is this mental barrier, as I've seen in the past month of traveling around Europe. There still is a mental barrier against really trusting and working with Ukrainian innovators.
So I think it's interesting listening to the two of you talk, because you're kind of talking about what's happening at two different levels. And so, Joe, what you are talking about is the political top brass and the military level, where they still can't wrap their brains around what is happening is not a fundamental change in how wars are being fought, but it's just a Ukraine-Russia thing. But exactly to your point, what has unfolded in Iran has actually just completely shattered that illusion. The other thing I would just add to that, last week, and maybe we can put a link to this in the comments or wherever, last week there was a really important, exceptionally well-researched article that came out that very, very, very clearly documented the work that is being done between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And in terms of the sharing of training, the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of components, the sharing of, ballistic missiles coming from Russia, information's being shared with China. China, as we all know, is the, mass producer of everything. And in terms of the number of drones and anything else, obviously, that's par excellence. And so in addition, that is really clashing with those top level views of that we're not going to fight like that. One, the countries in the world that are going to fight like that are going to fight like that, and we've now seen it. The other thing is the four of them are working together. And then, Joe, to your very point, the French want to build for the French, and the Germans want to build for the German, and the Americans want to build for the Americans. And that's not going to work, because that is not how our enemies are building. They are looking at crossing all kinds of information. So every single day, practically, the West is falling further and further behind because of these old patterns of thinking. And this, I think, then flips into we'll call it the ground level stuff. Max is talking about EDTH, which I also have to say, I really, really like this organization. I have from the very beginning. I went to one of their very first hackathons they had done in Warsaw. It was back in early winter of 25. And just the people that they drew. So this one was in Warsaw, but there were teams from Turkey, from Spain, from the Netherlands, from Denmark, who would come down, or even just individuals to work. And again, they are there because they want to learn. They understand something's changing. There is the spirit of being able to think differently, not being locked into that dogma of the previous 80 years of procurement and primes and everything that sort of is in there, locking that up. And I also believe, Max, sort of what you said is really it is this grassroots that is going to, at some point, be better prepared, than this top level is. And exactly, you hit it spot on. Most people do not understand how much of since 2014 in Ukraine has been like a volunteer effort. I think Ukraine had a standing army of like 6,000 people when the Russians invaded Donbass that first time. And there were like 10,000 people who just grabbed their own guns, ran out to the east. And, it was very much this, volunteer effort with the soldiers on the front. And then it was the same thing that we're seeing in Ukraine now, and it continues. There's NGOs, it's all of civil societies involved. And so it's a very different dynamic of how things are growing. There's not this, you must do it one way. It's all ideas are open. Problem solving is the first and only goal. It's not getting it right or making sure it follows with that rule. So to the degree that Ukraine has just such an extraordinary ecosystem right now, anybody, partners, startups who are not here taking advantage of it. The Ukrainians have put out so many paths that are available for foreigners to come into Ukraine, to be able to test equipment, to join the ecosystem. So the paths are there, and it's not that anybody can't do it. It's you somewhere in your brain are choosing not to for whatever reasons you are making up in your head that it's not, for you.
Guys, can I add two examples, if I may? So I've been to some of the pitching sessions in Europe that are not related to EDTH, and what the European Defense Tech do, they actually invite a lot of Ukrainians for the juries, right? So you have this great idea and you want to pitch it, and then there are juries sitting and they kind of decide whether it's a good one or not, fits, doesn't fit. So I've been, as a newcomer, I've been to one of those European events where there are no Ukrainians. And the kind of questions, and they listen to pitches, the kind of questions were like, well, what are the three things that your competitor, doesn't understand, or your future client should know, or something like that. And when I meet, when I see witness Ukrainian jury work, they're like, in one sentence, a guy who is maybe serves right now in the army or is a veteran says like, this won't work in real life. Like this kind of approach to this problem is just the one plant. And I'm not a military expert, but what I understand that if you try to build something new, the starting point could be close to reality or very far away removed. And what Ukrainian experience, integrated experience, helps you to understand is how far you're away from realistic solutions to this problem. And none of Europeans can deliver the same kind of reality check as Ukrainians can deliver. It doesn't mean that indeed you will have the same war that Ukrainians have. It's just practically impossible, right? The terrain, geography, all these stuff that I learned is important for for drones, for new tech and everything in terms of sensors. Yes, it's going to be different, but you can start, years or miles away and crawl your way to the solution that will eventually work. Or you can start with something knowing that, this is already a dead end and I'm not working. Surprisingly so, it's still not an industry staple to invite Ukrainians to any of this. And I'm shocked to find out so many now, panels, events, not only on European defense, but in general, preparedness and resilience, having zero Ukrainian voices, or at best one Ukrainian voice as a token, like, oh yeah, we know in Ukraine is bad, tell us how bad it is, and now let's move on to the expertise and, established Western intellectuals to tell us how we can prepare. So this is still shocking for me every time, everywhere I go. Not a lot of places follow the same formula like ADTH does.
Well, and when you think about this, yes, the conditions in other wars will be, you can't predict all this, and things will be changing. And as we see the Middle East, a different climate, etc. But we have to remember, Ukraine is the largest geographical country in Europe. There's many different terrains. They go through 4 seasons of war. They know how to adapt. And that ability to adapt is what has enabled Ukrainians to get to this point. And if you have, if you've trained that ability, you can do that anywhere. You can learn to adapt. And that's, they know what questions to ask. They've seen the pitfalls, and they continue to see the pitfalls. And when I was in Paris meeting with some of these people, I listened to some great people. I sat there for 10, 15 minutes listening to people describe drone detection devices they were making. And I'm just sitting there in silence. I'm like, I know Ukrainians that are doing this exact thing, and they're actually far ahead from what these people in an office are thinking about. And I said to the people I was meeting with, I said to one of the engineers, I said, "What's in your backpack?" He said, "What?" And I said, "What's in your backpack?" I said, "Because when I meet with people making drone detectors, for example, in Kyiv, they open their backpack and they show me what they're working on, and because they actually have it and they're actually producing it. What's in your backpack? Nothing, And they were shocked by that. And so I think, we have to sort of very strongly make this case. And I will say that smart people in the U.S., because they smell money opportunity, and they also smell that they might be losing that opportunity. Look at the Patriots. President Trump said, was it a week ago or so, that he will, the U.S. will authorize Ukraine to produce American Patriots. And I'm pretty convinced that I know why. Why now? What's the timing? Because Ukrainians are developing things so rapidly, and now they're starting to make medium range missiles and long range missiles, and we're starting to see that these missiles can work. And that terrifies the U.S. defense industry, because they know that if this is allowed to continue in this way, Ukrainians can innovate like this, independent of the U.S., they can start selling their products to Europe. And that's why America, it's not because of benevolence. That's why, and I'm okay with it. Whatever gets America to cooperate, great. But it's about business. And the United States says, if we don't let Ukrainians start producing Patriots, the Patriots going to become a losing product, because Ukrainians are going to make something better. And I think that's it's very important for me to focus on that, because it shows Ukraine's strengths, and it shows it's not a benevolent gift from the U.S. And in fact, we have to remember the Ukrainians have modified the Patriot missiles to make them even more effective. And if the more we can sort of tell that story in that way, it will help others who don't yet realize Ukraine's strengths to get on board and to start investing in Ukrainian militech.
Yeah, that's a good point about the timing, because Firepoint, who is the company that is making a lot of the long-range missiles and long-range drones that are doing a lot of damage to oil refineries in Russia's east, had started talking about ballistic interceptor missiles earlier this year, and it had really sort of put this on the front burner in terms of understanding that supply of Patriots were low. Ukrainians were going to start looking for their own alternative, which to a very large degree, if you think about this entire ecosystem, is more or less the Ukrainian alternatives of things that potentially could have been available in the West in traditional Western kit, or are totally new, i.e. the context of the fighting with drones and things like that, and all of the anti-drone protection that is needed and everything like that. But to the point about Firepoint coming out and saying, yeah, we expect by the end of 26 to have our own, you're exactly right. I mean, they were about to to challenge the market leading position of the Patriots. And so actually, Joe, I hadn't even thought about that. The timing of it, I think you're spot on. That's super smart.
At the highest level, people understand the threat that Ukraine poses to those who are complacent in the defense industry. And so everyone else in the middle should start paying attention more. I want to make sure, and Deborah, if you have any other points you want to raise about Miltech developments and what's been happening in the past weeks, let's make sure we do that. And I also, before we close, I want to make sure we get Maksym's perspective, given the book you've written, given all you've studied about Russian colonialism. Where are we now in the information war? Because in many ways, Russia is suffering immensely. And the world gets kind of complacent. I mean, people are saying, oh, Ukraine has won. It's very dangerous to do that. And we need to very closely, keenly pay attention to what Russia's next moves will be, especially in propaganda and the information war. Because in order to survive, they're going to have to do some tricky things. And I think we're not paying enough attention to that. So, Maksym, what advice can you give us, or what are you seeing that Russia is doing right now given that the fact that its oil refineries are on fire, there's maybe increasing anger toward Putin within Russia. What is the Kremlin's move to fool the world in order to bring momentum back to its side?
Yeah, I actually start hating that narrative a lot. That well, Russia is collapsing, everything's collapsing, everything is on fire, which is partially true. But if I learned one thing after studying Russian imperialism for that long time, that it is, first of all, it is the second longest standing imperial system in human history after the Arab one. And it has been very good at innovating and reinventing itself for 500 years. And that is something to acknowledge and to pay attention to. Of course, being the largest land mass empire helps because they have almost unlimited source of natural resources they stole, and they converted both natural resources but also human resources. They maybe are not so great at using the full potential of people they colonize, but they can still throw thousands, tens of thousands of people just on the meat grinder without any thought, and with the rest of the society just barely even mentioning because they have so many of them. So all of these things are there, and now, as you both guys mentioned, what is different for Russian Empire these days, that it is surviving not on its own. Now Russia is collaborating with every possible tyranny out there. They share the information, they share innovation, they have shared access to battlefield data. It's crazy to just watch at it. And while the democratic side of the world is still debating whether they were going to fight the same war or whether Ukrainian lessons are even applicable to their realities. So they're already years ahead in all of that, which kind of lands me to the point that if we allow Russia just to run its natural course of empire and collapse on its own, because all empires do fall, that's their natural life cycle, we might wait for several decades from now, or maybe several generations. It's going to be easy for Russia to reinvent itself. But the other fact is that we're at the unique inflection point, and Ukrainians are mounting the most successful resistance campaign in the history of all resistance campaigns that I've studied, and all the pushbacks against Russian imperial warfare that I've studied. This is very unique in the size, in the revolutionary changes that it's producing. And if we do not support that, if we do not empower that, and we do not empower Ukraine for win, not just standing by Ukraine as long as it takes, but make sure that Ukraine wins, there is no chance that Russia goes down on this accelerated path of disintegration. But the last thing that I think it's important in terms of cognitive warfare, which is I also love the topic. That's where I'm expert, actually. That the biggest illusion, especially in the West, that there is some disinformation and some so-called hybrid threats and whatever they call it, and FIMI whatsoever, and there is a war. For Russia and China, even if you look and read through their official doctrines, there is no separation between the both. They use kinetic war and cognitive war at the same time to achieve one result. And whereas in our view, we still treat it differently. And the very practical result of it, that still we don't understand fully the nature of Russian threat. We still are very uncomfortable calling it imperial and colonial threat. We're very uncomfortable thinking that Russia is pursuing not imperialistic goals based on cultural imperialism by some logical calculation of very rational actor. And as long as we don't even name those threats correctly, we cannot imagine any way. I've just read this fantastic investigation by the Dutch, how the Russians basically influence their decision making, foreign affairs decision making before 2022, that Dutch were advocating in front of Americans that Putin will never invade because they have some exclusive source in the Kremlin that say that, well, it's a negotiation tactic and they're just like scaring you guys off so you don't allow Ukraine to join NATO and EU. And they were, up until 22nd of February, they were advocating that it's not going to happen. Why? Because, again, they were victims of the cognitive influence campaign, because they were treating Russia as a rational European-like state. And in their mind, Netherlands would never do such things, so probably Russia won't do it either. But once you see it as an empire that has this urge to expand, that has this urge to civilize, civilize you into Ruski Mir or whatever, the price is, the logic is completely different. You see it, it's there, but you won't see it until you understand what kind of culture you're dealing with. And that's, I think, unfortunately, that's still the case for most of Europeans who maybe support Ukraine, but still do not understand what they're dealing in terms of threat of Russia and China and what's their main goal with Europe.
Yeah, Max, well said. And I encourage people listening who are interested in joining the fight in cognitive warfare to read your book. And here's a prime example of how easy it is for the Russians to manipulate us. Look at the International Olympic Committee saying, "Oh, now we're going to let Russia back in the Olympics." What has fundamentally changed since 2022? But no one is really seriously asking that question. And it's Russia is just sliding its way back into normal life, and this is part of it's people abroad are tired of the war, which is ridiculous because they don't have to live through it. But Russia is seizing that sort of complacent attitude, look at the death of Lindsey Graham. He gave that very powerful speech in Kyiv, and he was going to go back to Washington and to push a very tough sanctions bill. And everyone's, we're gonna pass this bill in honor of Senator Graham, blah blah blah. And now they're watering it down. They start adding other problems in other countries, Iran and everything else, and now they're softening it. So and this is what continually happens, and that's exactly what Russia wants. And only if we are disciplined and tight in our messaging and what we say. I mean, it comes down to the language we use. I mean, and that's why I hated when Trump would say stop the killing. We have to say stop the Russian war machine and be very clear about what we're doing. And now I think Ukrainians have held the line in this incredibly heroic way, and now we just start giving up when things are actually going well militarily for Ukraine. We start giving up on the informational plane, which is absolutely absurd. So, Deborah, final word from you on the latest in Miltech, what you're hearing, what we should be paying attention to.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm just trying to think about how to do a transition from what you guys were both just talking about. I think that right now, in terms of some of the success that they've been having, the Ukrainians have been having in terms of really starting to create some problems for the Russian economic apparatus with hitting all of the oil and production facilities. There is this level of, is Ukraine winning? And I also don't think that's actually a proper framing. It's like saying from one day to the next in a stock market, if the stock is up, if it's down, does that mean it's going to be the best year ever? Nobody knows. We are still in the middle, and to start using words like winning, for day-to-day up and down really distorts things a little bit. Ukrainians really do understand the threat that Russia poses, not just out on the battlefield, but in the cognitive war space, in the cyberspace. Nobody's talking about cyber much anymore, but I can tell you there is still a massive cyber war that's raging, and it's not just against the Ukrainians. The Russians are absolutely doing things in Europe as well. So all of this is still out there. Ukrainians are not, overly optimistic, are not sitting back on their laurels. They are just still heads down, do what you have to do, just keep doing what you have to do in front of you day after day after day. And that is actually how long term you move the needle. It's not a banner headline on top of some mass media. And so I think that is reflected in the defense tech ecosystem as well. It's just you keep your head down, you do the work, you make sure that soldiers have what they need. When new information comes in from the front, you take it in, you incorporate it, you make your changes, and do it again tomorrow. And so that's what it is. I do think that the success that Ukraine has been having has created a nice boost of sort of or from of encouragement from the West, which is absolutely baffling to me in terms of this default of we only want to be excited when you're doing well, and we're not going to say pick yourself up when you're not feeling so well. It's just it's such an interesting thing on the psychology of humans overall. But yeah, we're just keep moving forward, keep doing what you're doing, and yeah, so that's about it.
Yeah, we kind of have this mentality where, let's say you're trying to lose weight and you're exercising and you lose a few pounds, so you go eat a box of donuts. And that's the Western mentality here. And it's absurd. And I think this is, our friend Dean Joyce, Deborah, puts this very well. And I've thought about this ever since 2022. Everyone says, what does victory mean? And 2022, it meant surviving the next minute, and this entire resistance by Ukraine has been a process of creating opportunities. Put it this way, creating possibilities. And, the possibility with the Molotov cocktails, to protect your town was one thing, but that possibility then, once achieved, creates more possibilities. And look at what Ukrainians are doing, cutting off the land bridge the Russians have occupied to Crimea. And, 5 months ago, people would say Crimea is impossible. It's going to have to be given up. Well, now Ukrainians are creating the possibility that Crimea is untenable for the Russians. And we just keep creating possibility after possibility after possibility. And that's how you get to this idea of victory. You don't just say, it's going to be the collapse of Russia. No, what's the possibilities that need to be created this week and this month, then this year? And that's what Ukraine is doing. And so every time that there's a good success, we have to help everyone focus on what is the next possibility we need to create to keep moving in the direction of the destruction of Russian colonialism. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the largest myths of Russian imperialism is the invincibility of Russia as an empire. And just imagine, guys, how far we went from 4 years ago, Ukrainians creating these possibilities, to being scared to imagine that any Ukrainian missile lands on the Russian land, because supposedly Russians will all go berserk and nuke the rest of the planet, to a reality which is not even being covered anymore as a routine. That they destroyed 100 Russian ships in several days in Azov Sea. Mm-hmm. They destroyed 40% of fuel processing capacities in Russia. They bomb Russian war machine sites every night, and it's became such a routine, and nobody freaks out over it. And once again, it erodes this myth that Russia is completely invincible and the empire can stand forever because it's too big, too nuclear, too whatever. But the reality that Ukrainians are offering us to see exactly a possibility that one day there's going to be no Russian empire, and we can, stop paying attention to news and, stop being, so frustrated over watching it over and over again, especially for those people who don't want to do anything about it. That's exceptionally frustrating. So they would latch rather to this myth that, well, you cannot do anything about Russia, so let's just stop fighting and stop the killing or whatever they say, just as the easiest way to for them to get out of this situation. But Ukrainians providing them with very practical solutions. What can be done?
And that's why I think my favorite phrase in Ukrainian is malo po malo, little by little, step by step. That's how, in anything in life, but including in the the resistance. That's how you stay alive, and that's how you secure freedom. So as we turned off the recording here, and we were just chatting, the three of us a bit, and we said we got to turn the recording back on. Good lesson always to that. Often the best conversation is when the mics are turned off at the end. So we want to share with you this last little snippet of a conversation with Deborah Fairlamb, Maksym Eristavi, and me here to close our Coalition of the Doing podcast. Here we go.
Have you guys seen this massive read on Financial Times about the Palantir? It's called like the price of Palantir's politics. So basically, it's a huge profile slash investigation how basically them participating in identity wars tanks the price of stock, there's outflow of people from the company. And while I was reading it, the funny thing that for some of my clients, one of the kind of presentations on why they need to be prepared for cognitive warfare as defense company is exactly the clip from Saturday Night Live and their sketch on, just basically two girls being on the summer vacation and then they're being bombed by American army using Palantir software. Because, it's AI mixes up them with some drug boats or something like that. And I show it every time to companies, kind of a wake-up call that basically if you are in business of defense, the other side is waging intense cognitive warfare, targeting the society, with different fears, the AI that will kill us all, the militarization of the society, that the industrial military complex taking over our democracy and so on and so on. Those are very well-known narratives by Russian cognitive warfare, attacking democratic societies, seeding these fears. And if you're into this business and you don't even register that you're going to be the next in line, like, the activists now gluing themselves to the entrance to Rheinmetall factories in Berlin because they believe that those factories are shipped into Israel, when in fact the majority of it is being shipped to Ukraine. So you might not realizing it, but if you're in this industry, you are already the target of that cognitive warfare. Your reputation, your logistics, the kind of talent you can attract, the kind of reputation you can build. But unfortunately, I think people still do not quite get it, that they're at the epicenter of it.
Yeah, well said. And I think because Deborah.
No, I was just going to say I'm going to just loop in cyber behind that as well. And I mean, the cyber and the cognitive, sort of can sometimes go hand in hand in terms of just information access, whatnot. Obviously, the cognitive is sort of the more public facing side of it. But that is something that I know a lot of the Ukrainian defense tech companies really, at least on the cyber side, are keenly aware of, needing to make sure that they are locked up, from the back end as much as lock on the front door. And it's a really good point, Maksym, that companies need to be, aware of and prepared for, cognitive warfare attacks, because exactly to your point, they're coming.
Don't let me start it on cyber, where I get documents from some of the companies open to all on Google Drive with their pitch decks and whatnot. So that's a separate story.
I know.
We
can do a whole episode just on that one.
We should. I think we should charge a premium for that, because it's that's really information that people need, and we don't want to share with everyone. But for example, I mean, like the messaging apps. Like, I'm always looking for a new app for messaging, because as soon as the enemy realizes where everyone is, they spend all their resources to crack into that, and we have to be very cautious about it. And think about. I mean, Palantir has been, demonized in the UK, for example. And look, it's always good to have scrutiny, of course, of concentrated power in big companies. But Palantir has been more demonized than Russia. I mean, Russia is allowed back into the Olympics. If Palantir was a country, would they be allowed in the Olympics? No. That's ridiculous, And this is where we have to really pay attention to the cognitive warfare. Like, it's easy to fall into the trap of saying Palantir's, this evil big business. But let's first be mindful of who wants us to think that, and is this in proportion into what Russia is and what China is. And so I think that's where all of us have to be on guard, because we can easily fall. Yeah, there's pitfalls of AI, but let's not let this paralyze us into the inaction that our enemies want us to, the inaction with which our enemies want us to be stuck.
Scrutiny is super cool. As a former journalist, I totally agree with it. But it terrifies me that oftentimes, especially in the West, defense is a matter of identity politics or polarized politics or any politics, period. Yeah. For my perspective, from Eastern Europe, from Ukrainian perspective, defense should be outside politics. This is something that everybody should agree that needs to be strengthened and needs to be in place. Not whether I'm right, left, skin color, queer, not queer. This shouldn't be part of the identity politics. But in the West, it's often part of that. And it's terrifying that if I believe certain things, then probably I won't support defense. And if I believe the otherwise, I will support. This is crazy, and it's quite suicidal, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's suicidal. I think part of it's, in so many Western societies, we're starting to lose an idea of what we have in common with each other. I think the World Cup has actually been kind of helpful at counteracting that. But we forget what it means to be free, because we become complacent. It's doesn't feel under attack in the same way. And so we say, well, what's the point of defending this society? Because we don't even know what it is. And I think, in addition to the Miltech, you have to understand what it means to be free. And I think that's another part of the story of Ukraine that is missed by the shallow media. But Ukrainians know this. I mean, they're willing to, to bleed for what it means to live freely. And that story needs to be told as part of this, and as part of the way to counteract cognitive warfare. I mean, I think even when I see some of these MAGA folks like Laura Loomer, who are now siding with Ukraine, she's awakened and realizes that she was a victim. That she was a victim of Russian propaganda, as she put it, and she was believing it. But she still doesn't understand the Maidan revolution. She doesn't, she sees Ukrainians as a victim, and that's the first step. But they're not victims. Ukrainians choose not to be like Russians. They've chosen to resist the Russian war machine. Russians can make that same choice. Russians like any humans, have agency and could say, we're not going to be part of this killing machine. And yeah, you might go to prison for that, and you might die for that. Ukrainians it's worse than going to prison. They're getting bombed every single day because they refuse to join this totalitarian war machine, which they could easily join. And that point gets lost about, what this culture of insisting on freedom and dignity. And so as we tell the story with the Miltech, and maybe this is even an idea for future European defense tech hackathons, to always have an element that talks about the Maidan mentality. Because you always have to remember why we're doing this, why we're fighting, why we have to protect this. Hey, Deborah, Maksym, this is great. I want to continue these conversations, and it's a great dynamic we have here. And we'll have information in the descriptions about Maksym Eristavi and his book, Russian Colonialism 101. Also information about Deborah Fairlamb and her venture fund, Green Flag, which has been in the vanguard, of bringing Western investments to Ukrainian Miltech, Ukrainian engineering that is providing security not only for Ukraine, but for all of the West. So thank you guys. Thank you, Maksym. Thank you, Deborah. This is JP Lindsley with our Coalition of the Doing podcast from Underfire News. Go to underfire.news to get our daily Substack, one piece of smart journalism every single day on the defense of the West. Thank you. Until next time, do pobачення.
До побачення. Thanks, guys.